Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Road to Singapore from 1940. And this is my first video in my series where I review all of the Road 2 pictures, or the Road pictures starring Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. As I am going to be going in chronological order of the 7 Road 2 pictures, I am starting with Road to Singapore, which was the first film that was a huge success and paved the way for many future Road 2 pictures to come. And it's probably the weirdest one because it's really not like what you'd expect from a Road 2 picture. The quote that a lot of people like to use is from a TCM review, actually, or Turner Classic Movies review, where it says it feels a bit off. And it does actually feel a bit off, but it also doesn't. You kind of get the chemistry between Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, and you get like why people were so into these movies, because they have such a great chemistry together, especially in the beginning part of the movie. You honestly, even though I wasn't mad about this movie or crazy about it or really loved it, I still probably would admit to wanting to see more of them, not because I decided to do this series, but because they worked really well together. They have amazing chemistry. Right off the bat, you can tell these guys are best friends and get along great. Now, maybe that wasn't exactly true in real life, but you don't get that from the screen. What you get from the screen is that Bob Hope and Bing Crosby get along great together. And this does feel more like a typical studio film at the time, rather than a usual Road 2 picture, but they're kind of figuring it out. Their chemistry might feel automatic, and when you watch a lot of these films, as a lot of other people have noted as well, it feels like they just kind of came together because they have such a easygoing vibe to it. But this shows it actually took a while to develop it. They had to get through this movie to kind of figure out their strengths for it. It kind of does a lot of things, like it is more dramatic. It doesn't have as much of them riffing and improvising as we've grown to expect from these movies. Well, you gotta start somewhere. Bing Crosby and Bob Hope, of course, are best friends. They were working on the same ship and they've come back to town, and Bing Crosby is the heir to a big shipping company. His father, played by Charles Coburn, who's one of my favorite actors when playing a father. Just him in Bachelor Mother was amazing, but he's great in this as well, which I think was the year previous. He's supposed to take some responsibility and stop vagabonding around the world and get more serious, and he doesn't want to do that. And his fiancee Gloria, played by Judith Barrett, wants to get more serious and start settling down and making their apartment and things. But then instead, as he goes to their engagement party, and him and Bob Hope create a scene and then get in a fight and bring in a swordfish that they caught after they embarrass her and make a big scene that's in the papers. Did the papers really care this much about social events back then? Or is that just a movie thing? I've seen so many old movies where they make a big deal out of that. I figure there was bigger things to worry about in 1940. It's probably just a device, but it's a good device. They go to Singapore and meet Dorothy Lamour, who is the underappreciated third part of all these Road 2 movies, and start living with her, as she's not really clear which one of them she likes, as they both try to avoid responsibilities in Singapore. This movie was developed for a lot of people, and a lot of the development of this film has really been classified for most people as Hollywood lore rather than actual fact, but I'll tell it to you anyway. But apparently the idea of this kind of a movie had been kicking around for a long time. Originally it was going to be Fred MacMurray and Jack Oakey, but they turned it down, and then supposedly it was redeveloped for George Burns and Gracie Allen. All these people later said this was like not true at all, but then I've read Burns said that Gracie Allen thought the whole thing was silly, so who knows what exactly happened. They came up with the idea to have Bob Hope and Bing Crosby and Dorothy Lamour star in this film. Now, Dorothy Lamour actually is given billing over Bob Hope in this film. Bob Hope would be second billed throughout the rest of the Road 2 films, and even on DVD and VHS releases, Dorothy Lamour is second billed just on this movie. I like that they've upheld that. You'd think they would have changed it at this point. She doesn't really add much to this movie, although I know she's in all of them, although she's given a minor role in the last one, but we'll get to that when we get to it. I still think she has a certain amount of chemistry. She is trying to play, I guess, like a native girl, which she kind of plays a broad native girl kind of a role. It's not very distinct. She's not really wearing like yellow face or anything like that. All the racial relations in this film you could get angry at, but as a lot of people pointed out, these films are usually parodies of other adventure films. So getting mad at these films is kind of missing the point, because you're really not thinking about the films that these films are are parroting, which are the films you should be getting mad at. A lot of people watch the road movies not having experienced the climate that the movies were made in, so they're not understanding the climate it was made in. I'm not saying like what they did in this film was okay necessarily. There is a certain scene where Bing Crosby and Bob Hope do dress up as two natives so they can get free food, but it's played up more as they're ridiculous rather than making fun of the natives. I wouldn't say it's so they can make fun of that kind of culture. It's to show like how stupid and inept they are. The fact that they are making fun of themselves, it's not okay that they did it in a PC sense and stuff, but I don't think it's something where they're making fun of a culture. It's pretty obvious when they're dancing with everyone. The stupid one is them. Like, they're making fools out of themselves that they think they can do this. So in a way, it didn't really bother me. I've seen blackface in films and sometimes like, whoa, did not see this coming. I am not comfortable right now. When they try to dress up as the natives, it's very clear, like, they're idiots that they think they can get away with this, and you kind of think the natives are like, yeah, all right, whatever. They don't really get into it too much, but I understand people always say these films are like kind of very racist and things like that. I still think it's like part of its time period, and you can't really take it out of its time period and then say, oh well, this is the one that was the problem, when it was really all of Hollywood, to be honest. This film was directed by Vincent Scherzinger, who is the only person to have directed more than one road picture. He directed the first two, and I think a lot of the more dramatic moments don't feel like something I even wanted as an audience member. Not someone who expected the road pictures to do certain things. I actually read a New York Times review that came out at the time, and even the New York Times review is like, I like the early parts, but as soon as they get to Singapore, the movie kind of just like dips in quality. And that's when the film tries to get more dramatic. It tries to take Bing Crosby's relationship seriously, which was interesting because in a lot of these films you'd think like, oh, they don't take the women as seriously because they're men and they can get away with it and stuff. But in this movie, it feels like he has some melancholy moments about it. Like, you really get the sense that she's like in this shitty relationship with this guy and things like that you don't expect from this type of comedy. I also kind of thought when I was watching it, it's interesting to think about how this idea of not growing up and not maturing is something that's kept going throughout comedies, even to Apatow and Seth Rogen, and that's a constant throughout Hollywood comedies. It's kind of interesting. I think the dramatic moments don't work. This should be a fun movie. If you're going to see this film and have a good time on a Friday, Saturday night, you can laugh, you can hear some songs, and the dramatic moments just don't feel as welcome and work as well with all of that. It just feels like something like they wanted to acknowledge to show this film was a little deeper than it probably ever should have been. It doesn't play to the film's strengths. It just plays with like what this picture should really do. But Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, who were ad-libbing a lot, did their joke writers on set. Dorothy Lamour commented that really when she was working on these films, she always had to be prepared for whatever they were going to ad-lib, and what she really needed was a good night's sleep so she could keep up with them. I don't think she's got her rhythm down with them at this point. It's just kind of like a new idea. The reason these films are so unique and so different as comedies is because they made them in a different kind of fun way, and it feels like they're doing that but within a more structured studio film, and they clearly probably didn't have as much control. This is more of a studio run kind of a vehicle, and when you get that, you know, everyone knows what they're doing in this era in Hollywood. You have a studio director, he knows how to make a studio picture, and that's what he's doing with Road to Singapore, which isn't inappropriate. This is kind of like a band's first album where they're kind of finding their sound, but it's not the one they're known for. It's like their second one almost feels like their real first one. I know it's weird to mention a rock band when you talk about Bing Crosby and Bob Hope, but Road to Singapore is kind of that. You can see glimmers of that, and they do the patty cake thing that they're famous for, which is a really cute little thing before they punch somebody in the face, and the con man stuff, and certain things that you'd see throughout all of the road pictures, but it's really them kind of coming up with the basis to do those later pictures. And it's weird to fault this movie, but it actually seems like a lot of the criticisms people have of watching this movie now that we've seen all the road pictures and we have a reputation to them is the same problem the review I read from the New York Times that came out when this movie came out also had a problem with. But the beginning of this film is actually really funny and really good, and I got immediately into it. Bob Hope and Bing Crosby work really well together. I know that behind the scenes they didn't like each other, they liked fucking with each other, they were very egotistical. Bob Hope wanted to be more famous than Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby wanted to be more famous from Bob Hope, but they knew these movies were huge hits, so they're going to keep doing them because they were good for both their careers. Which is funny, is like they had such ego about themselves, but they're like, but we kind of have to get along with one another. And they had apparently performed in vaudeville a little bit before Road to Singapore. That's probably why they knew how to work with one another so well. That's the thing that's weird about Road to Singapore, is when you think of two actors who worked with one another, they don't feel as just immediately formed as these two. So Road to Singapore feels strange because you're watching, you're like, yeah, but it's not their problem, it's the director's problem, it's the writer's problem. It's not that, it's just like that it's kind of a weird version of a first movie because they clearly have worked these things out beforehand in terms of their chemistry. Even if they didn't love each other necessarily, they understood how to play off one another way before this movie started shooting. Apparently, since they were making up so much on set, the writers of this film, Frank Butler and Don Hartman, really didn't like what they were doing with this movie, but them making all their jokes and making all their improvs makes this movie come a lot more alive, and they seem to know how to do it a lot better than a lot of Hollywood films in this era. As much as it kind of feels like a regular studio picture, their chemistry and their improvs make it so much more fun than that. And I can understand if you're someone who's used to a usual kind of studio film, who's seeing a new movie quite frequently, by the way, which you were in 1940, so you're probably used to this type of film. So these kind of improvs and this kind of energy, you were like, whoa, what's this? This is so much fun. If you look at it in that, but I got the impression from that review and other things that I read that a lot of people did kind of complain about it, although the general public seemed to absolutely love it, and thank God they did, so we could get better movies and they could further develop the idea. It's kind of like a first season, a rougher first season, until they can really develop and become something. Road to Singapore is rough. It isn't probably the best road picture, but it's still funny. It's still a fun movie. It's just a little too dramatic. It does feel like it doesn't quite work, but it's still a fun enough time. And I think if you were going to the movies for just kind of simple escapism, it would work in a very basic way, a little above that than what you'd expect, but not enough that makes it a really great version of Hollywood escapism. Just kind of makes a regular kind of version of Hollywood escapism, and that isn't as fun to watch now. You know, you kind of want it to be more. Everyone has to start somewhere, and this isn't a bad place to start. So if you have seen Road to Singapore and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. I will have a playlist for all the Road 2 reviews. At this point, it's only this review, so it'd be a pretty empty playlist. But if you're watching this much later, there will be more reviews. I don't know when you're watching it, possibly all 7, possibly less than that. I don't know. I will have an annotation for that playlist below. Click on that if you would like to. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time for Road to Zanzibar.